Welcome back, everybody, to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I am your host, Solaris BlueRaven. My incredible guest tonight is Keith Hunter. And Keith, before we hit the break there, I had to interrupt you there. Would you like to go ahead and finish your thought? You're in the middle of something there.
Yes, I was just discussing the seismic event that North Korea seemed to have artificially engineered just to the east of their coast. And this was 12th of July this year, just a few months ago. And this was the 5.9 earthquake. Mm-hmm. And I said that this was when they'd already detonated 5 nuclear tests at their main test site. And there was a lot of pressure, don't do another one. So I think they did conduct another test, but in this case, it's a nuclear test, which essentially is generating an artificial earthquake. But at the same time as they did this test, just off their coast, it's like they were simultaneously sending a message, okay? Because it turns out that the actual configuration of that test, the very location of where this test was, and again, the coordinates, they're on USGS 40.855 north, 131.664 east. So this is just off the east coast of North Korea. And by setting off this device not a device, but triggering this earthquake at this location, it was not due to chance. They were sending a message to the United States and other countries in particular as to exactly what their response would be if they were attacked, militarily. And this is what I discussed in some great detail with Kerry, and I went through some of the very interesting screenshots, so anybody can look at that interview for the exact screenshots. But I'll just tell you basically what they did. Mm-hmm. If you look at this location, then its latitude is 40.855 north. Well, if you work out the elliptical great circle arc from the equator right to that latitude, to exactly where that test is, right there, yeah? The distance that you get, right, is, the distance that you get in terms of statute miles is about 2,811 statute miles. Well, if you take that distance and multiply it by 2, you get 5,623 miles, 5623. Mm-hmm. Well, if you took that as a distance, a great circle arc on the Earth, and you set it up and hung it up on the very seismic event itself, and you swung it around the Earth to see if it lands anywhere significant. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this 5,623 miles. Guess where it ends up? Smack bang in Los Angeles in the United States, about 1,500 feet from the Hollywood sign. I believe it's Chahwenga Peak, if that's the pronunciation. Right there, I'm thinking, wow. And I know that these arc lengths here, an arc length from the equator up to a test is a very significant one. These are one of the key measures used. So the very fact that twice that arc length there hung up on the seismic event itself and swung around lands right there. And here's the next bit, because that you could say, oh, maybe that's coincidence. Well, here's the next bit. If you take that 5,623 miles and you just divide it by 10, you got 562.3 miles. Well, again, if you take the same seismic signature event of North Korea and you take this 562.3 miles and swing that around, do you know what you end up on, dead on? The government building in Tokyo, in Japan.
Oh, wow.
And it is practically dead on. And what is even more astounding is that same great circle arc connecting up the seismic event to Los Angeles. If you just extend that great circle arc further from the seismic event, it turns out that it goes right on, dead on, over Seoul, right downtown Seoul, the capital of South Korea. And there's an incredible symmetry between the angle from where the pivot point of the seismic event going to Seoul and going to the Japanese capital like a pyramid, pretty much lined up, with its base parallel to the equator. These relations are so exacting, it's unbelievable. And so because in my work looking at nuclear signatures, and I see this, I say to myself, they're sending a very clear message here that if North Korea is attacked, their response will be nuclear. And the primary targets are Los Angeles in the United States, Tokyo, Japan, and Seoul in South Korea. But the thing is, it's not just a nuclear response that might involve, say, an ICBM or, a warhead on a missile. What they're demonstrating is they've got scalar beam technologies, and they could artificially trigger an earthquake at these locations. And what defense would you have against that?
Right.
I actually think that their threat to launch ICBM missiles at the United States is the weakest one. I think there's a brilliant chance they'd be taken out in flight, but I don't think you'd have a real defense against somebody triggering an artificial earthquake in the Los Angeles area.
Right. And let me just ask you real quick. I know I just love to hear you talk, and I hate to interrupt you, but I just want to ask real quick about, you mentioned that's 1,500, I think it's 1,500 feet from the Hollywood sign. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So what about the fault lines associated? Now, are they targeting those fault lines within that area?
Well, actually, I'll tell you another interesting point about the fault lines. The very great circle arc that connects up the seismic event to this Hollywood sign thing, at a certain section runs absolutely parallel, dead on to the San Andreas Fault. Parallel as in just 2.2 miles. This is just a certain section, just slightly northwest of Los Angeles, but it's like right there. This is why I wonder about this, whether they target Los Angeles maybe directly, or whether they would target the San Andreas Fault, knowing that would cause all kinds of secondary, destruction in Los Angeles and lots of other places as well. But this is why, one of the things, if we've been right about it, the United States in particular has dropped bombs on a lot of countries which have basically had to sit there and take it, and they can't fire back realistically. It's some of these punishment strikes in like Syria or Afghanistan, if you will, Well, it seems to me that now you're in a situation where you've got a country which really does have the ability to strike back right on your very doorstep within your own country. But the thing about these kinds of weapons is there's like plausible deniability, because when an earthquake were to strike, and again, we can talk about these hurricanes as well. If you're using exotic weapons which attack another country via, weather, whether it's earthquakes or hurricanes or whatever, there's a kind of plausible deniability. And the thing about such an attack, would the United States say, if a massive earthquake were to occur, sometime soon round about Los Angeles, would the US openly say, oh, we know it was North Korea, we've done analysis of it, they even showed what I've just told you right now. They could absolutely maybe confirm that they knew it was an attack. Would they actually do that? The answer is no, because they're admitting that they're defenseless, basically, and no country would want to admit that. And it's the same with some of these strange ship collisions that have been going on in the US as well, with US ships. It's like you've got all this stuff being used, and there is an awareness, I think, at some level within the military structure in the United States. They know these are attacks, but they don't have an answer to them. So they don't want to admit their attacks. Firstly, then the next question is, who's the attacker? But even if you know that, then you can also ask the question, well, are we defenseless against these attacks? The answer is yes. So do you want to even admit that you're being attacked? Answer no. It's like the United States is having to sit there and take it, just like all these other countries that, you know, you bomb, like
Well, let me ask you something real quick.
Afghanistan.
Do you think that the U.S. covert intelligence departments or exotic technologies has access to something similar with that type of using the type of scalar beam weapons or scalar technology you're suggesting?
Now, that is a brilliant question. It really is brilliant. And did you know, again, I'm going to draw on some of the things that Thomas Bearden says, as well as my own work. You know, I mentioned about Pine Gap and I mentioned about Menwith Hill. And I said that, hey, they seem to indicate that the people who are at least deciding where these bases are, the technology involved, like the Tesla type pumping thing, and the very fact that they're based on the same principles as some of these megalithic monuments, it suggests that there is an awareness of very advanced technology within the United States. But, and here's the big but, and this is where Bearden's work comes in. He's got a very interesting perspective on this. He talks about Soviet Russia after the Second World War. It's a real command economy, right? You know, no private property, no nothing, government in charge of everything, all the industries. So Stalin orders a massive research program. He, you know, basically practically kidnaps all the best scientists in the country and puts them in special compounds and says, find me the next best thing other than nuclear weapons, you know.
Right.
There's that kind of thing. And so they don't want to disappoint him, otherwise it's, you know, off with their heads kind of thing. So Bearden basically talks about how the Soviets got all the literature from the West looking for anomalies in physics, science, etc. And they developed the scalar beam weapon systems and other advanced technologies as well. And he basically goes on to say, you know, this was developed, though, under the tight control of the government and mainly the KGB. But again, they're all tied into the central government. Even though it's a communist thing, you know, it's the people's government in inverted commas. So this is why when you had instances in the UN where Khrushchev was, you know, banging his hands on the desk and whatever in the 60s and whatever, yeah, we will bury you. And they were literally, even from Khrushchev's own lips, they were talking about new weapon systems they've developed so terrifying they could blow up the world. And a lot of people looking at this guy thinking he's gone and his nut job, he's just lost it. But he's talking about these advanced technologies. And he is like, you know, general secretary of the party, you know, the main man in Russia. He has an awareness of them. Now, what Bearden seems to be talking about with respect to the United States is this. You have, and even guys like Stephen Greer, you know, the UFO guy, he talks a lot about the same kind of thing. He says, look, what seemed to happen in the United States, not being a command control economy, when they start to get things like UFO material, crash retrieval or whatever, they put this out to private corporations to evaluate. And those private corporations, yeah, will look at it, but then they'll like develop their own internal stuff based on it, you know, and then they contract these things out. So you get these special access programs all set up. And it's one of those things where it becomes detached from your civilian government, detached from many aspects of your civilian military.
Yeah,
and so
it's rogue technology.
Yeah, whereas you might have a situation where, say, today, Vladimir Putin, former KGB guy, he might well be a guy that could pick up the phone, get his generals in and say, hey, I want to use some scalar beam weapons to target this location here. And the people he's talking to know about this. They know who controls these sites. They make it happen. But whereas Donald Trump, commander-in-chief of the US, would he even know scalar beam weapons exist? Would he even know, would his own immediate advisors, would they be in the loop? Would they know who has these facilities? Would he be able to pick up the phone and order this stuff to be used? Or is it effectively, and so deep in the black project world, it's disconnected?
I agree with you on that. Yeah, it seems like it's within the military-industrial complex, wouldn't you say, or no?
Yeah, it's not part of it. And this is why when I see a lot of this stuff going on with these hurricanes and with the ship collisions in the US, for example. You've got, I think, at least 4 incidents which have occurred over the past several months or so. More recently the John McCain ship with the oil tanker crash.
Mm-hmm.
There was a cargo ship hit another, and it seems to me what seems to be happening is this. I'll bet that the US has been fed some false intelligence. Somebody's given you something to indicate that these ships in question, like the cargo ship, the oil tanker, maybe they're smuggling something important. So a military ship of yours has been tasked to intercept them. And I'll bet they've probably thought, we'll just, like, in an intimidating way, move in front of them at a safe distance to think, yeah, we can, we can outmaneuver them, but we'll move in front of them at a certain distance, to try to block them and intimidate them. And when they moved in front of them, somebody remote hit them with a scalar beam and just fried their equipment, essentially disabled them. They were dead in the water.
Yeah.
And then these ships just ended up crashing into them, especially with like an oil tanker. I mean, I think it takes 12 miles to like come to a stop, and you can't just turn them. They'll still continue going in the same direction, because they're so big with the momentum. So once that happened, these ships started getting just rammed. And I think at some level, they have to know they're being attacked. But again, they don't want to acknowledge it. And the other thing is, where are all the stories about Russian military ships getting rammed or Chinese ships? I'm not seeing them.
Right.
Well, where is all that?
Mm-hmm.
It just gives you this indication here that you've got some of these countries now, they see the geopolitical power shift globally, especially with the financial system and that. And they are now willing to start using these technologies against the United States. And again, the United States, will it acknowledge it's been attacked? Absolutely not. It won't want to do that because it doesn't want the hassle of naming the attacker for a start or admitting that they're defenseless. And again, I think that there's this sense that these weapon systems, at some level, in certain deep projects, we might call them US interests, maybe, has access to them. But are they like fighting on the side of the US? Are they like looking after US national interests against, say, Chinese or Russian national interests? Are they defending the US? I don't really see any evidence of that.
Right.
It's as if they don't seem to be doing that at all. So whereas I do believe that there are super secret programs in the US that have developed all kinds of stuff, my issue is I don't think they're tied in to the civilian military, as they are in, say, China or Russia, which are more authoritarian countries. You know what I mean? So I think that's the key thing here. That answers your question, I hope.
No, it certainly does. And, just getting back to the Hurricane Irma, which I thought I sent you that little bit of information. There was a link associated with it registering on devices designed to detect earthquakes. I mean, that's how strong it was. And that tells me to some degree that perhaps that was something that was manufactured remotely.
Well, I think the first one to strike was Harvey. There were another one at Katia, but I don't think that did too much. That were more in the Gulf of Mexico area. But the first one, Harvey, that was the one that went into Texas.
Right.
And then Irma, and I read some of the initial reports on Irma, and they were talking about how when it was still at its formation stage, it formed and intensified so rapidly. Like, a lot of people are just mentioning this in the mainstream press, saying, well, it's just formed like more rapidly than any other we've seen. It's just quite amazing, really. And they were just saying that, and I'm thinking it's been boosted up.
Yeah.
It's been boosted up and it's been steered. And the even more bizarre one is this Jose one. Have you seen that reports of that one?
Yeah.
I mean, firstly, just a few days ago, I was looking at one of the people reporting on it, and they were looking at an hurricane tracking system, and they got this entire plot nailed, saying, "Hey, this is going straight towards the eastern part of the US. It's going to the Washington D.C. area. It should arrive in the next 2 or 3 days." And he was showing you the tracking. This was that Bix Weir. I don't know whether you've heard of him. And he was holding up all the the printouts and saying, that it's so nailed on. And then you read reports, it's doing weird, strange loops. It's gone back down in intensity. And then you hear other reports saying, it could actually, rapidly get back, to a higher intensity, could go back to a hurricane and still hit the US. And it's a strange thing, because when you're looking at this in context, I'm wondering here whether it's another let's send the US a message. They did you with Harvey, they did you with Irma, and I think Jose was being held back. And I wonder if maybe the US is thinking, maybe we're not going to attack North Korea, maybe not. And then somebody said, okay, you're not going to attack, well, we'll not let Jose hit you then. That kind of thing. I'm almost wondering if that Jose thing has been called off, kind of.
Right.
I kind of suspect that might well be the case, because it's just so bizarre to have, at least 2 hurricanes strike the US, as devastating as they are, and then a third one just about to, but it does some kinds of really weird moves and then just peters off. So I don't know. I just think that maybe that could imply the US has somehow, taken a hint, but I don't know. Anything's possible. They could still strike North Korea. I'm not 100% certain either way. Who knows?
Right. And let me ask you one more question here about the scalar beams weapons being deployed. Is that being done via satellite, black satellites, perhaps?
I don't have any real issue with it being, with these beams mounted on satellites, but at the same time, because like what Bearden talks about, you can get these like radio dish type transmitters, which are used for, normal civilian purposes, and they can be modified relatively inexpensively to produce these kinds of beams. So I would say that the majority of these weapon systems, they are on the ground. And as I said, you don't need to have like a satellite in orbit that can put a beam right down on the Earth underneath it. These beams go right through the Earth. And in this regard, I can actually, I said they appear to have been used against the US. They've been used a few times in the past, and one of them was the Challenger incident, 1986. Another one was 9/11. And both of these incidents had the same signature anomalous weather patterns associated with them. With the Challenger takedown, I think that the article, the news reports and everything, they had it on the launch pad for like several days, and they kept saying, no, the temperature's too low. We can't, risk launching it. And I think they just got a bit, fed up or whatever. They just decided, let's just do it, see, just get on with it. Because they were talking about how if the temperature's too low, these O-rings, they won't be sealed correctly, and it may well cause catastrophic failure. But the weather patterns were basically manipulated to bring a massive cold front down artificially to the site. That was part of it. But the other thing was this. What Bearden was also talking about was all kinds of other strange things happening in the days leading up to Challenger being launched. They, for example, kind of sonic type booms going around the launch pad area, above the site. It's as if somebody was calibrating the scalar beams to, the trajectory of where the shuttle would go once it took off. And they were basically evidence with these sonic booms. You had instances where birds which wouldn't fly around the shuttle area because there's like an intense electrical activity from these scalar beams. And again, they were dying around the area. All kinds of weird things. It recounts all of this, in some detail. I'm just giving you a few things here, but he talks about all this stuff occurring. And so when you look at the way these weapons seem to work is like they modify the Earth's magnetic field in certain ways. And this creates the optimal conditions for the interference of these beams at a distance. And one of the side effects almost is anomalous weather patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you had with Challenger. And that was taken out right there, live TV in front of everybody.
Right.
Although the cold temperature did contribute to the sealant failures, they did use the scalar beams. They had it all set up.
Mm-hmm.
They were taking that out. That was literally an attack. Now, the same thing happened 9/11. Here you've got, and Judy Wood mentions this, Dr. Judy Wood.
Right.
There's this hurricane starts forming and is headed towards, New York area, the east coast of the US. And again, it's like there's almost a media blackout, and then it veers off very strangely.
Mm-hmm.
And she presents all these charts showing, these magnetometer stations. Again, evidence of massive manipulation of the Earth's magnetic field. And this creates the optimum conditions where you can interfere your scalar beams to create all kinds of effects. And again, anomalous weather patterns. And that's one of the reasons why I think that real planes were used to strike the Twin Towers. Because one of the things that Bean talks about in his books is this phenomenon called cold molding. Mm-hmm. And this is where, and he demonstrated this was demonstrated in the scientific laboratory, where you get a substance, it could be metal, and it's at room temperature. Now, usually you think if you want to turn a solid metal to liquid, you've got to heat it really, really high temperatures so it starts dripping, put a lot of energy in. Well, via scalar beam, technology, you could basically resonate it, affect the lattice structure, if you will, of the metal, the bonds, and it literally just turns into liquid. So you could have a square block, it turns into liquid, just drips all over the place, all at room temperature. You can affect the materials in this way. Now, when you look at the seismographs, the magnetic charts that Judy Wood talks about, I must admit, Judy was a bit of a tragic figure for me because she's a total no-planer from what I gather. And she's got all this evidence right in front of her. And it's like she fails completely to put it together to at least answer this one really contentious point about the use of real planes or not. Mm-hmm. It's like she's got so much of it right, but on this issue, she just doesn't really put it together. Mm-hmm. If you look at the charts she holds up, she shows you when the first plane struck, 8:46 was the time of it, and the other one, I forget, was it 9 something or 9:02? I can't remember. But the first one, if you look at this magnetometer chart, it's like it starts to dip and dip and dip, and does some kind of unusual like turnaround, it's like synchronized dead on to this 8:46 mark. And Judy Wood on her diagram, being ultra cautious like an academic does, instead of saying plane crashes in, she writes holes appear on the buildings, because she doesn't want to say planes crash in, but she notes the strange magnetic field dip that spiked downwards, synchronized like perfectly to this 8:46 when the plane. Now, what does that mean? Well, you know how around, again, she's got so much evidence there. There's lots of cars around the vicinity, a few blocks away, and they have weird melting engines or seeming, well, maybe not necessarily melting as in hot, but there's some kind of weird steaming, melting in the sense that the engines seem to catch fire in a way, but the rest of the cars are fine. It's only select cars and whatever. One of the things that Bearden talks about with regards to these scalar beams is you can key in certain, frequencies on the beams to interfere with the lattice structure of various materials. And this is one of the reasons why they targeted the Challenger to subtly affect the metals of the, to puncture them by making them like the cold molding thing, just subtly alter them to weaken them, so you cause structural failure of the Challenger. So when you look at the buildings then, here's what I think happened. You had a scalar beam shot from a device from some, site very remote. It went straight up through the ground. When it came up, it did pass through certain car parks and whatever, And this is why you have some of these anomalous burning, of the engines and whatever, because the beam was tied into certain metals, and it did affect some of these things. But the main thing was to target a key section of the walls of each of these buildings with a scalar beam and have this cold molding signal right there. And what Judy was showing you with this chart of the 846 synchronization is somebody is so carefully calibrating this weapon, holding it right to the last minute, so that just as the plane's about to make contact, they've really affected that key section of the wall. You see, that the aim of the game here, the intent, is you've got to have that wall maintain structural stability so that it holds together on the side of the building. But at all costs, it's got to be like that. But in reality, its lattice structure is so affected and agitated. It's like jelly. The steel, the concrete, it's like you've agitated it. So it looks, to the naked eye, it looks, it's just normal wall. But you have affected this key section. And these planes are able to fly right through with practically zero resistance, even though under normal circumstances they would smash into that wall, never penetrate, and the whole thing would pretty much fall on the outside of the building. But here's the best bit. This is what they did, the genius bit, if you will. They only targeted one half of the building, allowing the planes to penetrate. When the planes get inside, the opposing wall at the other side is unaffected, and so the planes do indeed smash up inside, and the wreckage is for the most part contained, which is what they wanted, because these were not civilian planes, these were military stealth planes, and they wanted the wreckage to be contained as much as possible inside the buildings, which is why they got all the debris from the buildings, carted it off to be destroyed very quickly. They didn't want the wreckage to reveal the true nature of the planes. But the planes were able to fly through with zero resistance. And if people check the video footage of the actual collapses of the towers, a few people have noticed this. If you take one of the towers, you've got like the section where the plane's just gone in, it's almost blackened for several floors and whatever. And then you've got a healthy section on top, and then beneath the damaged section, you've got like a healthy bottom section. And what happens in the collapses, it's like the top healthy section seems to buckle and fall into almost an empty, it's like the damaged section is almost empty, it's like it's thin air, and it falls into that. When it hits the top of the healthy section underneath, then the tower starts to go. And it does this because the lattice of the materials of that damaged section has been affected by these beams. There's practically no substance to it. It's like it had this massive cold molding thing. That's why it collapses in the way it does. It's right there, the signature frequencies must have been keyed in to the steel and the concrete. And that's how these planes penetrated.
Wow.
That is I'm convinced that's how it worked.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, let me ask you also, now when you talk about this technology, I have to go back to Tesla, because much of what you're describing is actually his old technology, weaponized even further, isn't it?
Oh, yes. I think we've all heard the death ray.
Right, that's what it reminds me of. I mean, that's what seems like you're talking about to some degree, yeah.
Yeah. I think he came up with stuff like this, actually, not just in World War II. I think this is actually World War One. He was talking about beams which could, almost like with a line of sight, go 300 miles away, knock out an entire air force, coming at you just with one sweep of the beam. He was coming up with stuff like that, and most of his contemporaries thought, what's he on about? What's he on about? But again, he's got a completely different understanding of things. You see, a lot of his contemporaries, when they were looking into radio waves, the whole radio pioneer stuff like Marconi, they were thinking of electromagnetic waves going through the atmosphere. And what Tesla was saying was, no. When I developed my radio transmission systems, I'm trying to nullify as much as possible an electromagnetic radiation effect in the atmosphere and intensify the waves going through the Earth. Okay, it's like lossless through the Earth. The entire signal is brilliant. And these other guys, They're caught up in the Hertzian theory of electromagnetic waves going through the atmosphere. And so they are developing weaker transmitters, okay? And so he's going along a completely different road to his contemporaries.
Yeah.
Really is.
That's very interesting. I remember hearing about how a lot of that technology was distributed equally, supposedly. I think Russia had pieces of it, and the United States and other areas, supposedly, of the Tesla technology. So it's interesting what they've done with it. Now, another thing I wanted to ask you real quick about was about Fukushima, because that was also something that was supposedly, or the earthquake was triggered not naturally.
Oh, definitely that was artificial. I did an analysis of this, and this is a really interesting one. This is a classic nuclear signature, and let me give you an example. You know when Hiroshima was attacked by the United States in 1945? And again, we've got the precise time of the attack. I think it's 23 hours, 16 minutes, 2 seconds universal time for the day in question. I think it was the 5th of August. So, again, with that precise information, you can work out the coordinates of the sun. Now, one of these critical arc length measures that you have associated with nuclear weapons that they try to make use of are arc measures on the equator of the Earth. So, for example, if you literally take the location, the longitude location of Hiroshima, where it was bombed, the city, and you take just the longitude location of the sun, right? And then you look at them both on the equator, and you work out the circular arc of separation between those two longitudes. The answer is practically dead on 1/6 of the circumference of the Earth. So if you take the circular equatorial circumference, divide it by 1/6, the answer that you're getting is actually 1/6 the actual circumference, and it's so exacting based upon these two things. Now, the reason I bring that up is this. I did an analysis of the Fukushima event. And again, it was March the 11th, 2011, and I think it's 5 hours, 46 minutes, 26 seconds, something like that. But again, it's straight there to the second on the USGS website. So I thought, okay then. So I looked at where the sun was, and then I looked at again, this is using the US Naval Observatory's own software to target where the sun latitude, longitude is on the ground. And I used the USGS for the location of the earthquake. And when you put it into a great circle calculator and work out the actual arc length separating them, it turns out the direct great circle arc is 1/6 of the equatorial circumference of the Earth. Just like that Hiroshima thing. It's two different components, but the 1/6 resonant fit to the equator of the Earth is present. And the accuracy level, again, you're talking about just adjusting the arc length a couple of 100 feet, which implies split-second timing. So for me, the earthquake itself was definitely artificial. It was a very high-yield attack. I'm not trying to think what... I think if you work it out using some kind of equations as to what its yield would be, like a nuclear yield, I think it's something along the lines of about 73 megatons. I'm not sure where that formula was right, but the highest yield atmospheric test ever done was by Soviet Russia in 1961, and that was 58 megatons. So this one here, about 78 megatons as a yield, but the seismic signature was a 9.0 earthquake, and definitely for me that was an artificial attack. And it's incredible, the pollution as well. It just makes you think of the insanity of the people that even did that attack, because of the radioactive pollution has just been incredible.
Oh, yeah. Well, to me, it seems like, we talk about the weaponization of everyone and everything, and I really believe that it feels like our whole world has been weaponized, right down to the transhumanism program. But, insofar as our ionosphere goes, what is your impression of the ionosphere itself and what's going on in our atmosphere? Do you think it's all been weaponized at this point?
Well, I think it's a bit of a topic area that I'm not that familiar with. I must admit, I've briefly mentioned about HARP. That's one of the main ionospheric heaters, but and the whole chemtrail thing, not a topic area I've gone into that much.
Okay.
I'm not really sure about changes in that sense. I mean, you're just going a bit off topic for me.
Well,
I just
okay.
don't know much about
No,
that.
I just thought I'd ask you about it. Well, let's go back for the megalithic structures for a second here. The sacred sites themselves obviously are power spots to some degree, and it sounds like you've been discussing how the military also correlates with that insofar as hijacking. In my opinion, I think they're hijacking the power spots and then sacred sites. Would that be a correct assumption or no?
Well, the placement of some of these structures, it's very clever, and I know a lot of people out there may be familiar with the so-called Russian grid. This is a study that was done, I think, in the 1960s, and they were looking at platonic solids, like geometrical forms like cubes and icosahedrons, dodecahedrons, octahedrons, tetrahedrons. Yeah, these are like shapes that all fit inside a sphere where the vertex points all touch the sphere itself, and they all have an equal all the sides are identical in terms of their makeup. And the Russians came up with they looked at the kind of the imprint of the Earth, and they found that there seemed to be a dodecahedron, which is like a 12-sided shape, a 12 5-sided pentagons, and an icosahedron, which is a 20-sided shape, 20 triangles. And I think the dodecahedron is something like 20 vertex points and 12 sides, and the icosahedron's got the inverse. It's got 20 sides and 12 vertex points. You can combine these two figures together basically in a special way, and they basically put that there, and they found that some of these vertex points, some of these lines, they appear to be related to magnetic anomalies, physical anomalies on the Earth's surface. I must admit, I looked at it and I wasn't that impressed by it, to be honest. And some people suggest that some certain megalithic structures are in line with that, but I don't think so. My own work has revealed some. The way in which megalithic structures have been placed is ingenious. It's very, very subtle. There are energy patterns. You might have seen, for example, when people have vibration plates and they sprinkle it with sand and then they start vibrating it. And if it's just normal scattered sand initially, if you just tweak the frequencies, suddenly it starts to develop like circular patterns and straight lines, and it's just amazing. All these fantastic ordered configurations. Well, when you get something like the Great Pyramid, which would appear to be a device stripped of internal equipment, it would at one point have been set into vibratory motion, and because it's stuck onto the Earth, it would establish energy grid pathways. It would excite the Earth to create these pathways, and it would be a nodal point on this matrix. And I found that what you're looking at is a cuboid grid matrix, not a perfect cube, but a cuboid, in the sense that you've got two squares, one in the northern hemisphere, one in the southern hemisphere, and then you've got rectangular sides. And I found that if you treated the Great Pyramid as if it were at the corner of a cuboid, one of 8 corner points, and you establish these great circle arcs connecting up, sets of 4 points all around it, what you do is the following. If for the latitude of where the Great Pyramid is, 29 degrees, 58 minutes, 51 seconds of arc north, if you take that square that the pyramid sits within, the top square of the cube, and you connect the great circle arcs for all 4 points of the square for that latitude where the pyramid is, and you add up these 4 arcs and divide by the elliptical arc from the equator to the pyramid, you'll get a value which will be something like 10.1456. Now, remember I said to you before at the start, the Earth once had an ideal year, 360 days. Well, if you take the current tropical year and divide by 360 days, this is like 365.24218 divided by 360, the numeric sequence is 1.014561. And I'm looking at this 10.1456. And when you look at the Great Pyramid thing, so it's as if they established it at the latitude they did because the ratio was 10 times the Earth year change for these special components. So it validates this pathway, these pathways based on a cuboid grid matrix within it. And the thing is, that same type of cuboid grid matrix is present hanging up on the Menwith Hill site in Britain and also the Pine Gap base in Australia. And the reason why you can confirm that is that the components, the great circle arcs connecting up certain points of the cuboid in the Menwith Hill grid to the Pine Gap one, you get a basic fraction of 4/3, 1.3333 recurring. And the error rate on that is something like 10 feet latitude-wise. So if you just shifted Menwith Hill just about 10 feet or so to the north, you'd get this like perfect 4/3 relationship between these points. This is what I put in my book, my occult physics book. I actually show you these diagrams. So I realize I'm going through this a bit. It's hard to visualize some of this because I've got these pictures of these diagrams in my occult physics book, and I show you the mathematics. So
when is that going to be available again? When's that going
to? It should be available when these printers get it done. It's with the PDF files with them, the cover designs with them. So as soon as they manage to physically send me another copy that I can sign off on,
wonderful.
It should be 3 to 4 weeks. It'll be on sale. And my website is occultphysics.com, so it's the same title of my book as my website.
That's going to be an incredible book. I can't wait to read that. You're a brilliant man. It's just such a wonderful, it's just wonderful to have you on tonight, so I just can't thank you enough. I know we're running out of time in the illusion of. I wanted to ask you real quick, you touched a little bit about the solar system insofar as how everything was in an exceptional state of harmony. And what indicators do you have that associates the fact that was happening?
Well, firstly, what I've done is I have shown that you can relate the changes proportionally wise. You know how, for example, I said the Earth has increased its physical size at the equator. So if you've got the ideal size, and the ideal size was 21,600 ideal geographical miles, which are 6,000 feet each, the actual Earth has expanded in direct proportion to its increase to its tropical year. So if you take that ratio, which is 365.24218 divided by 360, that 1.1456, and you just basically take the circumference of the Earth now, divide it by that, you shrink the Earth, and you find that British imperial measures capture brilliantly a circumference of 21,600 units of 6,000 feet with exceptional precision. So I come up with laws of proportion which tie together various things. But not only that, I looked, and this is in my book, I looked at the scientists who had done studies of Earth expansion and the rates of change they came up with. And I also looked at the moon, the movement of the moon away from the Earth. And again, we've got laser ranging for this. And my laws of proportion actually are backed up by these particular rates of change. And you can also, I said the moon once had 30 days a month. There are some what's called bivalve mollusks, fossilized ancient creatures. And we've got these in various layers that we've looked at, and they're tied into the life cycle of the moon. And so when we look at recent samples, they have like a life cycle, associated with 29.530 or whatever. If you start going back in time, going back tens of millions of years, these samples that we get, they get steadily greater. So, 50 million, 100 million years ago, the samples are like 29.8 rather than 29.5. And if you go back to roughly maybe 250 million years ago or so, you get samples of about 30 days bang on. You get this crossover. And this synchronizes to these rates of change very closely to the movement of the moon and the earth. So these laws of proportion I lay out in my book, they're backed up by some science, so you can actually work out when this ideal system was present. And there's work by guys like Tom Van Flandern looking at exploded planet theories. And I think what actually happened was the solar system was in a state of exceptional harmony, and there was some sort of disturbance, and certain planets blew up. And when they did, this is what caused the solar system to lose its harmony, and the planets to expand slightly, the orbits to change from ideal basic ratios to values to their present. So, I do lay out that in my occult physics book. The rates of change from the scientists, they match these laws of proportion I present. So I'm really happy it backs them up.
Yeah, it reminds me of Worlds in Collision too, of Velikovsky. The whole concept of what really happened in our solar system insofar as what caused all the damage. To some degree, I think that there was a lot of turbulence. Something really big happened, but it's just insofar as what exactly happened, who knows? I also had heard that the Earth was actually nuked at some point. That it did go through some kind of a nuclear war or something. I don't know if you've heard anything on that at all prior to mankind.
Well, are you talking about an ancient atomic war around about 10,000 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Because I've seen some of the work there. It's interesting because some of the most interesting dates about in terms of an ancient atomic war, some of the most interesting data is actually on Mars. They looked at some of the radioactive isotopes and what have you on Mars and certain areas, and found that they were related to what you get from nuclear weapons testing. But also, I think there was a citation, when the Trinity test was first done in New Mexico, and they had green glass all over the place, fused green glass. Certain sites in the Middle East, going back thousands of years ago, they've got the same kind of green glass all over the place. And so, there's a lot of people saying, yeah, there was some sort of atomic warfare going off there. So I've got no problem at all believing that. I do think that we had a very advanced high-tech civilization thousands of years ago. But one of the other great discoveries that I made, and this is not in my book, it's going to be in a different book, obviously, hopefully, but there is a cycle of destruction tied into a conjunction pattern, a special pattern which occurs in accordance with a very special sequence. And it's a conjunction pattern involving Mercury, the Sun, Venus, and Mars. And at the same time as that occurs, the Earth is near to the Pleiades star constellation. It fits the decoding of certain mythical stories. And when this pattern occurs, we tend to have massive global disaster, like in 10,964 BC, about 9600 BC, 3150 BC. All these key dates where we've got disasters seem to be tied into this pattern. So that's a really interesting decoding there. So I think a lot of global disasters that we have had are not necessarily man-made. They're part of a natural mechanism of the solar system. And that's how civilization periodically gets kind of brought down low and has to start again.
Right, that makes sense. And then also, now that we have the technology to make this worse for everybody, I'm wondering to what degree this world is going to suffer at the hands of mankind and his technological, warfare programs. But that's been around for a long time. When you talk about the ancient civilizations, I suspect they also had advanced forms of technology as well.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing about it. It's like why people use this stuff and how they get caught up into using it, I don't know, because it's like I was talking about with the nuclear weapons. You can boost these in unexpected ways. And when you start talking about devices like the Great Pyramid, which are resonating with the Earth itself, you can tap into very powerful celestial forces and destabilize the planet artificially if you take things too far. And I don't know whether maybe sometimes in the past we've had what you might call accidents. They didn't deliberately intend it, but they were meddling with forces they could not control.
I think you're right. I think they're still doing that right now. So interesting to see what happens on the timeline. I know America right now, it seems like it's very turbulent. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But we're just about out of time here, plus or minus. So once again, if anybody wants to contact you or reach out to you, what's the best way to do that, Keith?
It's via my website, occultphysics.com.
Perfect.
No space between the words. And my email's on the on the contact page on that. That's the best way to contact me.
Excellent. And what about presentations? Are you doing any public appearances anytime soon?
Not planned. That I don't travel much, to be honest with you. I've got some medical issues. I don't like traveling anyway, to put it bluntly.
I don't blame you.
I do a lot of stuff on Skype and interviews on Skype, and I like to do screen shares, sometimes to upload videos to YouTube, because a lot of the stuff I talk about, I have to say, it's a lot of numbers, and a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Oh, it is, but you're fantastic, and you describe everything very, very well. And I do want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'll have to have you back too to discuss more about your new book coming out and everything else. So I'd love to have you back on the show. So I hope you'll take us up on that offer too. It's fantastic.
I think we have got something other planned, didn't you?
Did I put you down for hyperspace? Because my other show at KCOR, I think I do have you down. I'll have to double check it, because if you're not, so definitely. So I've got you all ready, and then we can discuss your new book as well. So that'll be fantastic. Yeah.
Okay.
So what's down the road for you the next few months? Are you just going to be working on your books, or what are you up to?
Well, I'm hoping to get it, as I said, printed up in next month and start shipping it. I've got a list, you see, of people who put themselves down for, to have a copy reserved. So I'm going to be sending out a lot of them, and then I'm going to try and get a few more radio shows on there and start talking about some of the findings more.
Wonderful. We'll help you promote it over here. Thank you so much, Keith, for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And also, stay tuned for Shiny Side Out with David Dundry-Mecki coming up next to Sailing On tonight. Down Under, as they always do with their fantastic show. Everybody have a wonderful week out there. Thank you again, Keith. It's been a fantastic show.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Bye-bye, everybody.